Back at the question at hand, right? So the idea of what we think about talk is cheap, right? Because me personally, I think talking is that phrase "talk is cheap" means something way different to me than what it actually where it started, right? So to me, when somebody says to me, "Oh, talk is cheap," right? We have there's two ideas of what we think about, right? One is, you're talking nonsense. Put your money where your mouth is, in other words. But also to me, talk is cheap means talk is cheap. So if talking is the cheapest thing that you could possibly do to get a message across, then you better speak as much as you can and as frequently as you can. So your messages get heard, right? It goes back to the old adage, how I feel is that the squeaky wheel gets what? It gets the Earl. In case you're not sure. That's with the Brooklyn accent, the whole 9 yards. Oil. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. And that to me means a lot, right? Because when we think about what's going on constantly, on a constant basis, between how we feel about government control, how we feel about hierarchy, how we feel about how they put us in different classes and societies and all like that, right? But we need to be talking about these things constantly. And I think the idea that we don't is that I think everybody feels that their voice isn't worth anything, right? And that's why I say talk is cheap means something different to me, because I think a lot of people have this thought in the back of their mind that what they're saying isn't worth most people listening to it. And I say that's nonsense, not a pun in the term sense. Never mind. My brain works differently. So the idea is that I don't think it's nonsense. I think that everybody really needs to be voicing themselves in the way they feel about things constantly, so that we get a clear and concise understanding of what we want collectively, or what you want as an individual for certain things and about certain things. So when I say talk is cheap, I mean you should be talking. You should be, because it's the cheapest form of communication. And it's how everything is done. You cannot do anything without talking about it. You cannot do anything without thinking about it. You can't do anything without coming up with an idea of a thought that starts somewhere. So until you talk and speak it, most of the time where that terminology talk is cheap is that if you're only thinking it constantly and you're never speaking it, or you're never doing it, an action to plan, then yes, your talk is cheap in the double entendre of the meaning. So I always say, if you're going to talk about it, then talk about it, and talk about it collectively. Come up with solutions for problems and issues and things that are happening. Don't wait for your governments. Don't wait for your bosses or, other people that you think are smarter than you to make those, decisions and everybody else is smarter. So they're discussing and deciding. When in actuality, I'm going to go back to this, we the people need to be talking about this constantly. What it is that we want in our communities. What is it that we'd like to see change? These are the things that we need to be talking about on a constant basis. So when I say talk is cheap, I say, yes, talk is cheap, and you better talk as much as you possibly can. And that's why all of these certain things happen all the time. And that's why
My God, are you still talking?
Yes, I am. I am still talking.
Oh my God, who the hell cares?
I care. That's the difference. The difference is, for me, is that there's so many things going through my mind at one time about how I feel about issues and things and, current events and how wars and how and money and taxes. I'm always thinking about these things. And that's why I have to be speaking them aloud. Speaking them aloud for all of us gives us this idea, if you hear it and somebody else hears it, what the possibilities could be for things to change. So talk. Talk more. Don't talk less. I know we have a lot of these weird sayings and cliches about talking and doing are two different things, and I agree. I agree with those, right? There has to be a plan to action at some point, sometime. But if the discussion doesn't start, even if the thought is in your head, you need to release that. You need to hear it for yourself, and you need to speak it. So if it makes sense to somebody, it'll make sense to a lot of people eventually, right? Because that's what thoughts are. Thoughts are provoking. And until they're spoken, you can't provoke anything. You can't start anything. You can't even finish something. So you have to be doing these things. I really do think it's important that we talk as much as we possibly can to open up dialogue. And we have to be doing that constantly see, and here's the other part of it, right? Not just on the grand scale, because we always think that, right? My voice is only one voice, and who's going to hear me? And I say, well, now with this technology and everything we have here, how could somebody else not hear you, right? In the old, back in time or whatever it was, we didn't have this technology, and you couldn't reach large numbers of people around this entire planet at one time. But now we have this ability. But even before we had this ability, these things still happen. They catch on. People recognize good thoughts, talking about things, and things always need to be spoken about and then planned for action, right? So us as the people, we have to be speaking it to each other much more than we really are. I think collectively, on the small scale, and that's what I was getting to. Starting on the idea of the smaller scale, right? So if you live in a town or you live in an area, whatever it may be, there's got to be community centers. There has to be places that we can get all these things started on such a small level, and we start talking about it on a small level. Then it influences the rest of the communities. And once it starts to influence the rest of the communities, then we get to reach out and reach more people about this, and not allowing just the people that are talking behind closed door. Here we go again. Your boy from Brooklyn is just letting you know, is that if we're not talking about it, they're talking about it. Governments are talking about it. Leaders are talking about it. And they're talking about it amongst themselves. And they're going to make those decisions for everybody unless we talk about it. So if we're not talking about it amongst ourselves, if we keep closing our front doors when we come home and just thinking that let the next guy handle it and we don't talk about it, it's never going to go where it needs to go. The thoughts are going to stay in your head, and the voices are going to stay really, really subdued, because then nobody feels confident enough to do these things, So like, even if we just take these things on a small level and we start, being proactive for our communities and each other, these things that are happening outside that we're watching now, like wars in the Ukraine and, China taking over other parts, like everything is happening out there. And we're not speaking about this. And even right here in this country, we're not talking about the things that are happening now. We're letting these big governments, and we're letting them talk about it. And then we, at the end, want to be mad about all of it. And I say, no, if we stop for a second and we start collecting our thoughts and talking, because talking is the cheapest form that we have. So we should be doing these things, right? Comes out hilarious. But that's my thought about talk is cheap, right? So let me get back to this, because I like to do a lot of research, and I like to think about things and then talk to other people and read other things and thoughts from people, is to understand why we come up with these things and why we do the things we do, right? The complacency of not talking about it, because it becomes, I don't know, it becomes taboo after a while. It's almost like it's just that's status quo, and we don't want to talk about it. So we just kind of leave it. We leave it on the side, right, for the next guy to talk. And then when somebody comes up with this idea and you're like, oh, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, well, shoot, if you were thinking the same thing, you got to talk about it. You have to talk to somebody, And like I said, if this is your platform and these are the ways you want to reach people, then you should do this. Then you should get out there on your own, stick the camera in front of your face or the microphone in front of your face, and start getting the messages out there. And that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be done in such a grand scale. Even if everybody just starts talking about it, even if you're just posting something and it just goes up real quick and it's 2 seconds or 15 seconds of what your thought was about something that was happening recently, and you just thought about it and you said it out there, and then all of a sudden there's one person, and then 2 people and 3 people like, oh, I think the same thing, and then the conversation's open. And before you know it, look at this. We're creating that community base of ideas and thoughts and collectively coming up with solutions to problems. It just works better.